Hello and welcome to the ramblings of a 42-year-old man. Chris Smith here with you today, and we're going to pick back up our Final Fantasy X coverage. We just left the area of Luca. We had our big Blitzball tournament. We met Orin, and he's joined the team. Titus and him are now officially Guardians, and we're going to continue forward and get going with the rest of the game. So please stay tuned, enjoy the rest of the story, and we will finish off our Final Fantasy X coverage here. Thank you. So at this point, we start a lot of walking. We have to go all up this place called the Mihin High Road. It's a long walk. We'll get into lots of random battles. We'll start building up sphere levels. Really crazy about this point. And it's just a long walk. Eventually, we get up to the end of it at a place called Mushroom Rock. And when we get there, we realize that a group of Albed, with the help of a group called the Crusaders. And the Crusaders are people who think that rather than having the Summoner always fight Sin, they want to try to fight Sin on their own as well. And they try to do this battle. So the Albed, using their machines, and the Crusaders, using all of the troops and stuff that they've been able to gather, are trying to fight Sin in this place. They actually kind of call it over by having kind of like, whenever Sin leaves an area, they always leaves kind of like lingering remnants called Sin Spawn, and they've captured some and are going to try to use it to lure Sin in. And Sin does come and completely wipes them out, just wipes them out. And so Yuna has to do her sending again. Seymour's there as well, and at this point, we don't know quite what his intentions are, but he is starting to, there's obviously some connection that he has with Yuna, or that he wants to have. He's definitely very interested in Yuna, we can see. But he wishes us luck on our way, and we continue on our path after this unfortunate, not great battle that they had with Sin. And that gets us through to, from Mihin and Mushroom Rock, and the next step that we have is the temple at Josei, which is just past this area. So we arrive at the temple, excuse me, voice crack, whoa. We arrive at the temple of Josei, and Yuna learns her next summon, which is Ixion, which is kind of your thunder summon. A lot of times we've had Rayma in the past has been our thunder spell. This time it's Ixion. He's like this big lightning unicorn. It's cool. We also learned from some other summoners that we run into that some summoners have been disappearing on their pilgrimages. It's just, nobody's been able to tell where they're at, and nobody knows how to find them. And so everybody just kind of says, be on your guard, be on your lookout, protect your summoner really well, Guardians, and we move on. So we continue our journey. We have to cross this giant kind of glowing lake called the Moonflow. It's a beautiful scene. But we have to get across there, and we ride a big, like, elephant-looking creature called a Shoepuff. And that's how we get across the Moonflow. As we're doing that, a machine comes and attacks us and tries to take Yuna again. So again, this is the second time that Yuna's been trying to get kidnapped. We've heard about, summoners getting kidnapped too. So we're curious what's going on here. We fight this machine, get back on the Shoepuff, and finish our path across. When we get across, we find a girl kind of crawling up onto the beach, and Titus recognizes her as Riku. And he's like, Riku, what the heck? What are you doing here? And Riku comes and talks to Yuna, talks to Orin, and she ends up joining as well. She actually ends up being Yuna's cousin. So Yuna's mother was actually an Albed. So Riku's father was Yuna's mother's brother. There you go. So Yuna's uncle was Riku's father. And so Riku asks if she can join, but you can kind of tell she does not agree with this pilgrimage thing, and we'll find out some of the reasoning why that is as we go forward. But she does join our crew, and now all of a sudden we got all of our team. All of our teams together. We've got our speedy character, we got our thief, we've got our black mage, our white mage, our accuracy guy, and our tank. So we got all of our characters at this point. And so we are going to continue on with the pilgrimage, even though Riku doesn't particularly want her to. She'll follow us through to our next stop. So our path to the next temple takes us through a place called Guado Salam, and this is the home of the Guado, which is Seymour's people. So we get there, and it's also home to the Far Plane. So I don't know if you remember when I was talking about Yuna sending people, she would send them to a place called the Far Plane. And what this is you go up in this, and it's almost like you're standing in the middle of just infinite space. And you can see the pyre flights, they call them, all those lights that came out of bodies when she was doing the sending, they're all floating around in this space. So that's the Far Plane. While we're at Guado Salam, we run into Seymour again, and Seymour actually proposes to Yuna. So there's been, since Seymour's kind of the him and his father were kind of the start of the Guado and Yevon kind of coming together, and so having a Guado and a Summoner come together would be really good for Spira, and so that's kind of the way that they're approaching it. And Yuna's thinking about it. Yuna says that she'll think about it, but she must continue her pilgrimage, so we're going to leave Guado Salam as she, contemplates this offer from Seymour, which of course Titus is not all about, because you can tell throughout the game Titus and Yuna have started to have a bit of a connection. They're, they're both younger, they're both, their parents are both gone, and they're kind of trying to find their way through this world, and Yuna has this amazing resolve, and Titus is just trying to kind of figure out what the heck is going on. But there's definitely a connection between the two of them, and he is not happy that Yuna is thinking about this proposal. So leaving Guado Salam, we have to pass through an area called the Thunder Plains, where there's always lightning flashing all over the place, and there's a side quest tied to this that is just a complete pain in the butt, and I'm not going to get into side quests too much for this game. We'll stick with the story. But we get through the Thunder Plains, and we arrive at Macalania Woods. And inside of Macalania Woods is the Macalania Temple. And so we get to the temple, Yuna prays. We now have the summon of Shiva. And we've seen Shiva in the past. She's your ice summon, Aeon, according to this game. Now, as we're at this temple, we see a recording that Yuna has found. And it is a recording of Seymour's father, specifically saying that Seymour is evil and is going to murder him soon, which of course his father was killed. So we find out that this did happen, and Seymour is not a good guy. We're not sure exactly what his plans are at this point or why, but we know that he's killed his father. And so we are confronted by Seymour as we leave the temple, and he's kind of like, have you thought about a proposal? And she's like, duh, we just found out you killed your father, so we're going to be fighting you now. So we fight him, we defeat him, but before Yuna can send him, the rest of his Guado people come and grab him and take him away. And we start getting chased, and we have to run out of the temple. And as we attempt to escape, Sin comes up from underneath the ice where this temple is sitting on and attacks. And we end up falling through the ice, and we awaken in the desert. And we have to try to find all of our party and get back to where we need to be. All right, so we've woken up in the desert, and we have to kind of go through the desert and find the rest of our party. We find everybody except Yuna. We cannot find Yuna. Luckily, Riku says that at the center of this desert island is where the Albed live. It's a place they call it home. It's where the Albed stay. And so we travel to here, hoping that we can find a way out of the desert and back to try to find Yuna. And we realize as we kind of come across, a dune, sand dune, home is being attacked. And it's being attacked by monsters and the Guado and people from Yevon as well, are all attacking the Albed. And so we arrive, and we're trying to kind of help the Albed, kind of escape from this attack. They're all trying to get to an airship that's going to take them out of there, and we need to try to get to it too. And as we're traveling, we find this kind of vault area at the bottom where we find a whole bunch of summoners. All of these missing summoners that have disappeared during the pilgrimage are all down here. And evidently the Albed have been taking them, and we're like, what the heck? Why do you keep taking these summoners? And this is when we find out exactly what happens to a summoner after their pilgrimage. So summoners go through this pilgrimage, they get all their summons, and they end up in the ruins of Xanarkand, where they will be gifted their final summon. They call it the final Aeon. And they will summon this final Aeon to battle Sin. And in doing so, Sin will be defeated, but the summoner will die. No matter what, the summoner dies whenever they do so. And so the Albed, don't agree with the pilgrimage. They don't agree the summoners should be having to give their lives for this, especially since Sin keeps coming back after 10 years. And so they have been, kidnapping these summoners. That's also why Riku has not been wanting Yuna to go on this pilgrimage. Those times we've been attacked by machines, that's been the Albed trying to stop Yuna from doing their pilgrimage. And so Titus finds out for the first time that Yuna's going to die at the end of all of this. And, he'd been kind of talking to her, like I told you, they've been growing closer throughout the game. He's always saying, like, hey, after we defeat Sin, we could go party, we could go do this, I'll show you my world, you can show me Spira, and we'll do all this stuff. And, Yuna's been too nice to ever say, that's not going to happen, So this is him finding out, the revelation of what happens to summoners at the end. He's understandably upset by it all. He's like, how are you guys letting this happen? Yuna's your friend. He's mad at Waka. He's mad at Lulu. He's like, this is her choice. She's chosen this path. She knows what the end of it is, and all we can do is support her. And there's, they say, we don't think we've tried talking her out of this before, but it's, this is what she wants to do. This is her path. She wants to follow her father's footsteps, and this is what happened to her father as well. And so, After all of this happens, all this revelation, we are able to escape from home on the airship. We meet, Yuna's Uncle Sid, Riku's father, very boisterous, loud guy, but very, he again does not want Yuna to have to give her life fighting Sin and stuff. So, but he helps us try to track down Yuna and see where she's at, and we'll get into how we find Yuna next. So from the airship, we're able to we find out that Yuna is in Bavel, and Bavel is kind of the center of Yevon. That big religion is the home base of Yevon, and there's a wedding that is about to take place between her and Seymour. Obviously, she is not wanting to do this. Seymour is dead, but he has not been sent, so he's able to still, evidently when you haven't been sent, you can still walk around like you're a normal person, but the worry is that eventually you're going to turn into a monster. Well, Seymour was already pretty monstrous even before he died, so it's just kind of following suit. So we crashed the wedding. We jumped down from the airship, landed where their wedding is being taken place, and try to crash it. Unfortunately, we end up getting captured. Yuna as well. She fights back against Seymour and is captured. Luckily, we're able to escape. Yuna is able to get to the temple that's there at Bavel, and she is granted the Aeon Bahamut, or Bahamut. In Final Fantasy XII, when they have voice acting, they call it Bahamut. I've always called it Bahamut, but that's what it is. We're confronted by Seymour again as we try to escape Bavel, and we are able to defeat him again, but again, we don't have a chance to send him before we have to run off because, of course, more enemies are coming after us. We're now considered enemies of Yevon, and that's rough for Yuna because Yevon is her religion. The religion of the summoners is Yevon. You're going to these temples and you're praying for the Aeons and everything. So there's a whole kind of discussion that happens between her and Titus that should she continue this pilgrimage now that we're considered enemies of Yevon. And she feels like she still needs to protect the land of spirits. She's still very resolved in the fact that she wants to defeat sin. And even if it's just 10 years of peace, 10 years of peace is worth it for the people. And so, she's decided she's going to stay on her pilgrimage. And her and Titus have a very romantic scene together, set to some gorgeous music. Suki Dene, which is it's a Japanese ballad, and that Nobuo Uematsu wrote, and it is absolutely gorgeous. It's a great scene. Probably, I know I mentioned, the opera scene from Final Fantasy VI, Aerith's death from Final Fantasy VII, and this scene. Those are probably the top three Final Fantasies, definitely for me, in my brain, but I think probably overall, some of the most famous scenes in Final Fantasy. So they have the romantic moment, and then they're going to continue on with the pilgrimage. So continuing on, we reach a gigantic area, this big old flat lands area called the Calm Lands. And this is evidently where the final battle between the final Aeon and Sin takes place. We have to continue past here to get to the temple where she will actually call the final Aeon, but this is the area where the battlefield pretty much is at. And it's also, they say it's where a lot of summoners kind of not lose their way, but kind of back out of their pilgrimage. A lot of summoners stop their pilgrimage here because it's kind of the last quiet point before you get into the end game, And so we pass through. Yuna's very resolved. We're going to go out and do this. We pass through the Calm Lands, and we have to go up Mount Gagazet, which is where the Ronso are from, Kamari's people. Now, Kamari's people are very much followers of Yevon, and so they are kind of not necessarily wanting to let us through because we're considered enemies, but, talking with Yuna and her resolve and everything really kind of turns them for us, and so we're able to walk through the mountain. Where, again, we get attacked by Seymour. This dude doesn't stop. This time we beat him off the mountain. Like, we defeat him, and he falls off the mountain. I love that there's a final line here where Titus says, "And this time stay on." Anyway, we get through Mount Gagazet, and we beat Seymour at the top, and we get on the other side of the mountain, which is where we're finally going to come across to the ruins of Zanarkand. Just before we get to Zanarkand, there is a kind of a wall on the side of the mountain, and it is covered with what looks like people, and they are actually Faith. These hibernating people that we've seen in all the temples. This is the whole wall of them here somehow. And as we're kind of passing this area, Titus passes out, and he starts having a vision, and it is the Faith talking to him, especially the Faith from Bavel, where the Bahamut summon is at. We've kind of seen him off and on in Titus's dreams, and sometimes when he gets close to Sin, we've seen him. And so what he kind of tells Titus is that the Faith that are all hibernating right now are dreaming, and their collective dream has kind of coalesced in this land of Xanarkand. Titus is Xanarkand. So Titus is a living dream. He is from this dream world of Xanarkand. Him and his father both have somehow gotten pulled out of the dream onto Spira, and so now Titus is here. But we've learned that he is part of this dream world of the Faith, and the Faith are kind of tired of hibernating and dreaming, and are hopeful that if Titus is able to somehow with Yuna finally completely defeat sin, it would allow them to move on. And so then Titus wakes up, does not tell everybody about this revelation that he's a dream, but he has kind of that is now in the back of his head going forward as we go through the game as well. Reach the ruins of Xanarkand finally, and Titus can tell, it's like, oh wow, this is definitely not my Xanarkand. This place is torn down. But he now knows that the world that he's from is a dream, as a dream that these Faith they've recreated what Xanarkand looked like before it went into ruin. So that's kind of how his world was. But we reach the ruins, and this is where that very, very interesting, the very beginning of the game, where Titus is like, listen to our story, this might be our only chance to tell it. And so we've caught up now with his tale. And so everything from here on is actually happening in real time. It's not a story from Titus. So we go through the ruins, we get into the Temple of Xanarkand, and we find the ancient summoner Yunalesca, who was the very first summoner who ever defeated sin 1,000 years ago. And she tells us that 1,000 years ago, a spirit known as Yu Yevon possessed an Aeon and became the first sin. And we learned that, Yunalesca being the first summoner, she had to create her final Aeon using one of her guardians. Now, she only had one guardian, was her husband, Zaon. But every summoner who has come since, every 10 years, since 1,000 years ago, they get here and they have to choose one of their guardians to turn into the final Aeon that will battle sin. And then Yu Yevon will go from that destroyed sin and will possess the new final Aeon and become the next sin after a period of about 10 years. So it's this whole spiral going around. And Yuna has been so resolved in this quest, and she's believed in the teachings of Yevon and stuff, and that there's going to be a point where, as long as they atone for their past sins, and it's very, very, very religious, and they atone and they do everything right and do everything they're supposed to, eventually sin will disappear for good. And Leska tells her that will never happen. No matter what, Yevon will always possess the next Aeon and will always continue going. And you're just like, well, I'm not going to sacrifice any of my people for something that's not actually ever going to get us free of sin permanently. And so we end up getting attacked by Yunalesca, and we have to fight and defeat her. Now, there is no chance for a final Aeon. So there's, of course, some people are, oh my God, we're never going to be able to defeat sin, But we've decided we're going to find a way to completely defeat sin. And by doing so, we are going to have to somehow defeat the spirit of Yu Yevon. And so, we will see how we figure out how to do that. So kind of talking through things. So we now realize that this is what happened with Jecht. Every time that Titus has gotten close to sin, he's seen visions of his old man. Well, that is because when Braska got to this point, Jecht offered himself up as the final Aeon. And Jecht, I tell you what, Jecht is not... he had a plan. He's like, look, I'm not from here. I'm this dream of the Faith. Make me sin, and maybe things will be different because I'm not an actual from this actual spirit world. I'm from this dream world. And he tells Orin, go get my son, bring my son here. Between me and him, we should be able to find a way to clear this up, because again, they're not from this world. They're outliers, and there's got to be some sort of way to do it. So that's kind of how that whole backstory went down. That's why Jecht is now sin, why Titus is now here, and so Titus is able to, again, because he's a dream of the Faith, he's able to have these communications with the Faith as well. And they tell him that if they're able to get inside of sin, defeat Jecht's final Aeon, and then what will happen is Yu Yevon will try to possess every other Aeon from that point forward. And so what we have to do is summon each of our Aeons in turn, defeat them after Yu Yevon possesses them until there's nowhere for him to possess anymore, and then we have to fight and defeat him as well. It's, again, like every Final Fantasy, it seems like there's always a very confusing plot by the end of it. But the point is, we have to, bust a hole into Sin, go in, we will find Jekt in there somewhere. We have to defeat him. Then we have to summon each one of our Aeons that Yuna's learned from this point on. Let Yu Yevon possess them. Defeat them. Let him go all the way down the line until there's no more Aeons for him to possess, and then we have to defeat Yu Yevon himself, and then boom, no more Sin. That is the plan. And so that's what we're going to start. We're going to start by attacking Sin itself, which is a scary proposition all by itself. All right, so at this point, we're in our airship. We attack Sin. We are able to... We realize that since it's Jekt, and Tidus knows his father a little bit, we're able to kind of piece together some ways of doing that. We've learned that the hymn of the faith, which is kind of the song that's always kind of playing around all the temples, has some sort of a soothing effect on Sin. So we have everybody across the world. We pass this message to everybody kind of come together and sing this hymn at the same time, so Sin can hear it and kind of be calmed a little bit. Well, he gets calmed a little bit. We go into the attack on the airship, blow a hole in his side, drop off our crew inside, and now we are inside Sin. So we've also run across, guess who? Seymour again, because the last time we defeated him, he must have gotten absorbed by Sin as well, and so now he is inside Sin. So we fight him for the last time. Yuna is finally able to send him, and thank God, no more Seymour. Whew. Too many times. So we get past that point, and eventually we come across Jekt. And Jekt and Tidus kind of have a moment together where they talk through some of their differences and stuff. And he says, "Hey, you know what you have to do here. I'm about to lose it because he cannot stay in control for very long. And he's like, I'm going to turn into the Aeon, and you're going to have to fight and defeat me." So we do. He turns into Braska's final Aeon, which is of course Jekt. We have to fight him. We defeat him. Tidus and him have kind of a final goodbye, and then Yu Yevon appears, and he's kind of this floating beetle-looking thing. It's a weird form that he's taken, but we go ahead and do the face ID. We start summoning each of our thing. We summon Bahamut, we summon Shiva, we summon Ifrit, we summon Ixion, and one by one, Yu Yevon possesses, we fight and defeat, and we go on to the next one all the way down till every Aeon has been summoned and defeated, and then Yu Yevon is there with nowhere to go, and we fight and defeat him as well. Now when we do so, and Sin finally completely disappears, all of the faith start to pass on, so they're no longer dreaming anymore. They turn into stone. They're no longer hibernating. They're gone. The faith are ready to be permanently asleep. They're tired of dreaming. Unfortunately, as their dream disappears, we know what's going to kind of happen there. First, though, when Sin disappears, Yuna does this big final sending for all of the spirits that have kind of been absorbed into Sin. She does a sending for all of them. As she does so, Ornn starts to disappear as well, and we realize that Ornn has been dead. Ornn was a dead spirit that never got sent. He was killed during that battle with Yunalesca 10 years earlier when Braska and Jekt got to Yunalesca. And so he tells Yuna, don't stop, please, I'm done. We've done what we need to do. So he disappears. And then as the dream of the faith ends, Tidus begins to disappear as well. And this is the first time everybody kind of knows this. And Yuna's obviously very upset, and there's a gorgeous scene between the two of them where he's kind of comes up behind her and tries to give her a hug, but he's disappearing, so you can see through him. And it's the first Final Fantasy game I think I ever cried, but it was very, very moving. But Tidus kind of does a final leap off the airship and disappears, and you see kind of a scene of him meeting his old man, and I guess you would consider it the afterlife. So yeah, that's the end of the playable part of the game. We kind of see a in-game scene where Yuna is giving a speech to the people of Spira about how Sin has gone for good and how they can finally be free, and not to forget any of the people who have passed during all these battles and stuff. Don't forget the people who were with them throughout everything. And then we have credits. And then we have a post-credit scene where Tidus is waking up underwater somewhere. He's kind of stretching. He's not quite sure where he's at. All of a sudden, he starts swimming the surface with a giant smile on his face, and boom, cut, the end. So it's kind of ambiguous, like, what's going on with Tidus? Where is he at now? Where did he wake up on? If you play through 10.2, you'll get some of that. Honestly, it could end here. I think you could definitely take it as the fact that somehow Tidus is back, and he's woken up in the water just like he did in the very beginning of the game. and he's going off to swim up there and go find Yuna. But we'll see another little chunk of the story with 10-2, and we'll see how we get to that point. All right, so legacy of Final Fantasy X. Well, critically and financially, smash. I mean, this is the number 3 best-selling Final Fantasy game of all time, and this is we've had Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 8 were up there too. This one, the first one on the PlayStation 2, and just a big financial success. It's been near the top of many all-time game listings, especially any listings about best Japanese RPG or best RPG in general. They're always somewhere in the top 10 to 5. Best overall games, it's on many lists of that as well. Is the first Final Fantasy game to get a direct sequel. I know we've mentioned 10-2 a couple times here. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of that game. I'll just say that Yuna comes back along with Riku. She's got a new party member named Pain who joins as well, and we're playing through that game with those 3 girls throughout the entirety of the game. There's no extra characters you play as. It's just those 3. And we can pretty much see what life after Sin is like on Spira. Yuna is much more a freak character. She's very happy and kind of girly almost, you could say. Girl, girly's not the right word for it, but everything's a lot lighter. So it's much brighter. Sometimes it can be a little bit goofy even. It's definitely a lesser game than 10, but it is fun to see all these characters. And it came out so quickly after 10 did that you can see that they used a lot of the same, landscapes, a lot of the same backgrounds. So you're very familiar with the world that you're going around. You know most of the characters even. And so it's just kind of fun. It's kind of like just a fun bonus thing to play through. And eventually at the end, as long as you are able to complete certain parts of the game, and there's certain things that you have to kind of do to make it happen, you'll be reunited with Tidus at the end of the game. And the very end of the game shows him waking up under the water, just like the very end of Final Fantasy X. He comes to the surface, and he's off of Besaid, right off that main island, and him and Yuna have a reunion again. Waka and Lulu are married in this game. They've had a baby as well. Just almost fan servicey, I guess you could call it, but it's fun. It is fun to play through. At least I played through it once, and there's a lot of little extra things that can sometimes make it a little tedious, but eventually it is pretty fun to play through at least once. So that's 10-2. It came out just a couple years after. It was 2003 versus 2001. There's been a lot of re-releases where it's kind of put both games together. There's a PS3 and PlayStation Vita, which was kind of their handheld system at the time, that they came out with the 10/10-2 remaster back in 2014. They have since released that same remaster on the PS4 in 2015, and it is now on Switch and the Xbox One as well. It came out in 2019. So all these re-releases kind of have 10 and 10-2 collected together. That's Final Fantasy X. That's the story of Tidus and Yuna. One of my favorites, absolute favorites. I think it's my second favorite behind 6. My all-time game list is definitely in the top 5. I love the story, love the characters of Tidus and Yuna, and their kind of the path they go through. I love the battle system where you can see the choices that you're making next, and how each character has a specific role to play when it comes to fighting things, and how you're not just like, oh, I'm using Cloud, Tifa, and Barret, and everybody else is just going to be level 10 for the rest of their lives. No, you need to use most of your characters throughout this entire game and keep them all kind of up-leveled and everything. So it's fun. You get to know every one of the characters a lot better that way as well. Final Fantasy X is a lot of fun. Great start to the PS2 era. This will continue. Our next one actually is an online game, Final Fantasy XI. And we will take a break next week to talk about it. And we'll go ahead and talk about Final Fantasy XIV too, the 2 online Final Fantasy games, the multi, what is it, MMORG? I don't even know what all this is. But anyway, the multiplayer online games. We'll talk about both 11 and 14 next week. I have not played either of those, so I'm not going to go into huge detail about it. I'm going to look up some information about them. We'll share that, and we'll be probably just kind of one of our quicker Final Fantasy videos next week. Before we jump into Final Fantasy 12, which I will be very upfront of saying Final Fantasy 12 is the last Final Fantasy game that I really, really loved. From there so far, my love of Final Fantasy has dipped just a little bit with the next games after that. I'm hopeful that Final Fantasy 16 will spark it back up again, but we will see. That being said, the next couple weeks we'll look at those online games. We'll look at Final Fantasy 12, and then we'll continue our series as we go from there. So, as always, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you've ever thought about getting into a Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy X would not be a bad place to start because it is fresh enough that the graphics and stuff aren't going to throw you for a loop based on what things look like nowadays. And story-wise, is still one of the better ones that's available. So if anybody wants to jump in, this is a good jumping in point. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And we will ramble again soon. Thank you.